We'll give people a couple more minutes. I know that Kari and Fabian both are unable to attend today. Hi, Abe. How are you doing today, Abe?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great, thank you. Great to be here. Hi, Tony.
Hello.
Hi, Michael.
Hello, good afternoon.
Let's give us just a couple more minutes and then we'll get going. Hi, James. Okay, I know we have a couple more people to come in, but I think we should go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Welcome everybody in. Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your participation in the Equity and Mobility Committee for the I-5 and I-205 toll projects. We deeply appreciate your time and your commitment to this process. So today, we'll be listening and reflecting and discussing specific things, including the development of understanding of the committee recommendation process, including the input on the performance measures, equitable engagement, and mobility strategies. And we'll learn how evaluation criteria and performance measures are used to evaluate alternatives and how to provide input in developing equity performance measures. We'll also review the revisions and adopt the draft I-205 and I-5 projects equity framework and the Equity Mobility Advisory Committee charter. So action-packed day. Again, we'll be recording the meeting. When it comes to technical help, Brett is the person to go to. You see his, you can text or email him. You have his information here on the screen. Please note his number. We will be recording the entire meeting, and this will become part of the public record. The recording will be made available to the public within the next week. To find more information about the project, go to oregontolling.org. Community members, you are welcome to email your public comments to us at the Oregon Tolling at odot.state.or.us. So we're going to start this evening with a centering exercise. So I invite you to close your eyes or to gently look down. Feel the chair under your legs. Breathe in deeply through your nose. Hold for a moment and then out your mouth. Feel your hands on your lap. Breathe in deeply through your nose. Hold for a moment and then breathe out your mouth. Feel your feet on the ground. Breathe in deeply through your nose. Hold a moment and breathe out your mouth. Slowly open your eyes and breathe normally. Thank you. I love to begin our work with a land acknowledgement. The purpose of my land acknowledgement is to center the traditional Native inhabitants of the land upon which we live. I want to respectfully acknowledge the Chinook, the Clackamas, the Clatskanie, the Kalapuya, the Multnomah, the Molalla, the Tillamook, and the Siletz people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. I pay my personal respects to their elders, both past and present. So today, we will do public comment after our welcome, and then we'll get into committee business and reporting out. I've asked a couple of you to be prepared to do that. We'll look at the committee charter and the purpose of the committee. Then we'll take a break for 5 minutes. Yay. Then revisions to the draft tool project equity framework. We'll talk through those, and then introduce step 2 of the draft tool project equity framework, and then we'll look at next steps. I always like to begin by looking back. So I'm going to ask you to take a couple of minutes to reflect on our conversation that we had, our last one, our meeting number 3, during our last meeting, and note what resonated for you and what was something new that you learned. And if you could take 2 minutes, I'm going to put the timer on and reflect in your journal, and that will be very helpful. Thank you. 20 seconds left. All right, thank you for that. I really deeply appreciate when we reflect back to where we were, and then it's our ability to move forward. So we always review our agreements. We agree to listen, believe, and reflect, and accept non-closure for the moment. Speaking your own truth with compassion is so important while listening to understand and not to respond. We value and celebrate each other's experiences, and we open our hearts as well as our minds to explore lots of different possibilities as we go forward. We make space for everyone, take space, and then are concise in our comments. We bring our best thinking into the room. We attack the problem and not the person. And then we honor disagreements and frustrations because we will have differences of opinion and we'll explore and address those. So thank you. Thumbs up again for the agreements. I appreciate that. Very good. Okay, so I wanted to start off with committee questions and public comments. So there was a request from a committee member to change when public comments are sent to the committee for review. Presently, they're compiled at 11 o'clock in the morning, the day before you meet, giving the committee 24 hours to review. The suggestion was to give you guys 48 hours for review. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'd like us to have a brief conversation about that. And then I would also like us to bring up if there are any discussion of public comments received for this meeting. So I'll stop sharing and we'll be able to spend some time taking a look. Sorry. Okay. Any thoughts about that? The first suggestion is giving you 48 hours to be able to review public comments. Does this sit well with you? Any other suggestions? I want to open it up. Bill?
I think that's a good idea. Having a little bit more time to review would be helpful.
Okay. You have a lot of materials. Yes. Okay. Any other thoughts about that? Can I have a thumbs up that says yes, 48 hours is what you want? Very good. I believe we have everyone in agreement. Thank you for that. Are there any particular public comments that you want to bring up now for discussion with the committee? Yes, Abe. You're on mute.
This is my first Zoom meeting of the day, so I'm readapting to the. I have to unmute myself. I just wanted to raise up one of the comments that we received from Rick Fernandez, and he talked about the reading level of the equity framework and our charter, and he took the time to read the whole document. He had some comments about lowering the reading level, which I really appreciate that call out as somebody who's been providing feedback on that document and wanting to make it functional and useful. And so he suggested rewriting the whole thing, which I think would take a lot of work. I'm happy to help create like a one pager that summarizes the documents once we kind of adopt them. And then I guess I would challenge us as we create more deliverables and products to use more plain language and make our documentation more accessible as we create more recommendations and comments for ODOT.
Thank you so much for that, Abe. Thoughts around that? Sharon, yes?
Yes,
And-
I agree. Because I think in the transportation world, we often kind of get into a lot of acronyms and sort of technical and jargony discussion, and it really makes it hard for people who aren't in this, don't live in this space to understand. So I'm always trying to encourage my fellow folks in transportation to, let's not use acronyms every other sentence. Make sure everybody can understand what we're talking about.
Thank you for that. Philip.
Completely. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Michael. Philip and then Michael.
Oh, okay, thanks. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, okay. So I was curious as sort of a tag along to the idea of simpler language. And you can just, and I may not even know the answer, or maybe the answer is already there, but are these materials being translated into different languages like Spanish and so forth, for public consumption?
I'm going to ask Hannah to step in on that question.
Okay, and the reason why I ask is that I participated in a webinar actually just a couple of days ago that was sponsored by the Hispanic Access Foundation, and they were talking about a whole different set of issues around climate and wildfires and so forth. And there were a couple of folks from Southern Oregon who commented that one of the biggest problems that their communities were experiencing around policy, and especially policy in this particular case that had to do with environmental policies, was that they didn't understand and couldn't read just about everything that was coming out of Salem. And so they identified that as kind of like barrier number one, which was around communications.
Thank you.
Good question, Dr. Wu. We have everything translated in Spanish. Right now we have a mirrored site for our I-205 comment period, and that has all of the documents on there, including the framework. And then we have about 4 other languages, Vietnamese, Russian, traditional Chinese, simplified Chinese, that we translate the project fact sheet into. That's posted on our website. And when we do engagement with our community engagement liaisons, they do a lot of work in different languages, and they use those translated documents.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. Michael and then James. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you. I just wanted to voice some support for, getting materials to be simplified and just telling a clear story. And I agree with what other folks have said. And I think too, it's also a matter of time, and people have different priorities going on. And so when they take a moment to look at transportation as a topic, I think we can be in service to have something that is as simple as possible. So I just wanted to continue on that train of thought. Thanks.
Thank you so much. James.
Hi, I wanted to get back to that public comment piece. There's a lot of public comments, and I really appreciate all the comments that come in. There's a lot of the comments, they reference studies and much deeper dive and examples of other things. And I personally don't have time to go in and read the studies on top of the personal comments and so forth. And so what I was wondering is there someone who is looking at these personal comments and kind of doing a deeper dive on them?
Hannah, I'm going to go to you for this also.
Right now, the way I'm pretty sure this is it. Someone else will have to correct me if I'm wrong. We're a big team here. Right now, the way we've been handling it is that if the comments are addressed to the committee, we record everything, but we're sending them directly to you to have you decide how you want to, what you want to do with them, and if you want to respond to them. If there's a question to the project about the project where you wouldn't know the answer, something that maybe was a very specific question or a little bit more technical, then we would kind of step in to provide that information so that you would have it if you wanted to respond.
So a question then, we talked about that 48 hours before the meeting being able to go through the comments, which I think is great. But as an example, I could go through that and be like, well, I don't have time to go back and look at this study from, another area. And so it could be a lag where I wouldn't be able to respond to a public comment until like the following meeting, just because of just the tightness of time.
Yeah.
And that's fine, right?
I'm sorry?
And that's fine if there is that lag on getting back. Is like if I saw a comment that I thought was really engaging and I did a deep dive and it was like, well, the comment came out prior to, like, say, this meeting, but it won't be until next meeting until I'd be able to comment on it because I haven't had the time to make that deeper dive.
I think that's fine.
Okay.
That there's a lag because you're doing your research and you're stepping in to learn as much as possible in order to be able to address it.
And this isn't your full-time job and you're volunteering and helping. So thank you.
Exactly. We're all human. Good. Very good. Amanda?
I just wanted to, I wanted to add in response, or I guess in, I don't know that I would really call it response, but in relation to that comment around the readability and accessibility, I think for me it's very helpful to have this, the engagement snapshot that kind of gives a summary of all of the ways in which engagement was happened, because I think it's important for people to know that this committee and these documents are not the only, are not the only pieces of information to share with folks, and that while we are an advisory committee around equity, I think there are other opportunities for communities to engage. And so there's a little section in this document about community liaisons, but I think it would be helpful to know, maybe a list of community-based organizations, or I don't know what all the work that liaisons are doing, but places where, very localized specific communities where there's been some outreach or input or engagement opportunities. I think it would be helpful to list that out so folks see like, oh, these, we're also connecting with these other organizations, or they're sharing this information with their service communities, or, whatever that might, that full picture might look like. But I think it would be helpful to be a little more explicit about ways in which equity related engagement is happening beyond all of us and the information and representation that we bring from the communities that we serve.
That's a good point. We can go into more detail in our the report that we're putting together of our engagement for the comment period. So we'll have more detail in there. We were trying to keep the snapshot to, I think, what is it, 4 pages? It's pretty long.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm just thinking for folks that aren't inclined to, people that aren't going to dive into report or on your webpage or wherever.
Beautiful. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you for the comments. Really appreciate this engagement. I am going to go ahead and share my screen and we will continue on. Which then moves us on to public comment. And we welcome the community's voice and participation into this process. Penny, can you set a timer for 2 minutes and then also let us know if there are any people who want to be involved in public comment? And if you're on your phone and you want to raise your hand, please use *9, and then we'll be able to see that your hand is raised and bring you forward for public comment.
Okay, we should have the timer up there. At this point, I am not seeing any raised hands from any of our attendees. And so if you would like to make public comment at this time, there is a little option for you to be able to raise your hand down at the bottom of your screen. And that will signify to us that you would like to make public comment to the committee at this time. And then again, as Christine said, if you were only on the phone, it is I forget what it is, *9?
*9, yep.
*9, that will also raise your hand for us. And at this time, I am not seeing, I see one hand. So I am going to unmute RJ Shepherd. And if you are muted on your end, please unmute. And RJ, you have 2 minutes to make your comment, starting now.
Great, thank you so much, everyone here on this committee. My name is RJ Shepherd. I am co-chair with Bike Loud PDX, but I will be testifying on my own behalf today. Today, I just want to actually dive into more about the impacts of air pollution in the criteria that you're evaluating when looking at decongestion pricing. This past month, we saw our skies turn red. Thousands of families have been displaced and our air has turned toxic, The urgency to reduce our transportation emissions and address the climate crisis for the sake of our neighbors across the state cannot be overstated. This August, there was really interesting testimony by Dr. Schindel at Duke University at the House Committee on Oversight and Reform that basically shared that the impacts of air pollution, especially related to climate as well, are twice as bad as previously thought. And so acting on climate by transitioning from fossil fuels will save nearly 4.5 million lives over the next 50 years. I just want to point out that there was a great study done with Easy Pass tolling in New Jersey, which after implementing Easy Pass, premature births actually fell by between 6.7 to 9.2%. And so, I'd really recommend that you ask ODOT to pull out more of that information about how airborne pollution is going to be impacting communities of color. And if decongestion pricing can have a significant impact on our students, our young ones, as well as also women and babies moving forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, RJ. I do not have any other hands up. Once again, if you would like to make comment, public comment, please use the little icon to raise your hand. If you're on the telephone, you can dial *9 and it will raise your hand for us. We do not see anyone else. So I think I'm going to give it one last shot. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Christine. I believe we are completed with public comment.
Thank you so much for your help, Penny. I really appreciate that. All right, I will continue to then share my screen. We will continue on with committee business. So there are many resources and requests that you as a committee are bringing forth, and also that you're bringing forth. And so we want to be able to track the requests that you have, the resources that you have, and to make sure that we are meeting the needs, that the project team is meeting your needs. And so the matrix here, the requests and questions matrix, is a living document that will keep track of those requests. It'll be sent to you prior to every meeting. It will live on the website, and all of the supplemental materials that you as a committee bring forth and want to share with each other will also live there. And so I just want it to be a central place for everyone to be able to access and share the information that's so important to all of the decision making and the recommendations that you're going to be doing. So it is both a matrix, and the supplemental materials will be available here, and request feedback on how to make it better. So use it, get into it, and then please let us know how we can make that even a more useful and dynamic document. So I know we recently sent it out, and so I look forward to your feedback on this material. So at our last meeting, I want to say that I overstepped my bounds by suggesting a potential process for adding an additional committee member. And I want to apologize for that. I did not realize the extensive vetting and engagement process that ODOT had gone through to onboard this committee. So I'm inviting Hannah to come forward to give you the project team's thinking around this request. Hannah, do you mind?
Thanks, Christine.
Thank you.
I believe that this request gets at the need for us to include perspectives of people that are living with a disability in our work and the work of the committee. And I think having this deliberate acknowledgement and conversation, ongoing conversation around who is represented on this committee and who isn't is really important. And I think it's something that we'll probably do every time we get together. So last time we got together, it came up that there's a need to include that lived perspective of people who are experiencing a disability. So I think there's a challenge, with every committee having 100% representation, whether your committee is 15 members or 30 members. Like I imagine it's very challenging. So we're struggling with this, and we've been thinking about the goal of needing to include many perspectives. This time, we have determined that it's a lived perspective of someone who is experiencing a disability or has a disability. As we get deeper and deeper in the work, like there could be other perspectives that are missing from our committee. And so it's our job to continue to ask that question and to think about that. So with that in mind, we don't think adding one person to the committee or adding two people to the committee is going to solve our problem of missing voices, not having 100 representation. So what I'd like to do is have a discussion with you to see some strategies, some supplemental strategies that we could use to add to this committee so that we can ensure that we are bringing in those missing perspectives, those missing voices. Today, we're talking about people with a lived experience that are living with a disability. It could be other perspectives in the future. So that's what I'm hoping we can talk about today together and kind of see different ways that we could do that. Before we go down that road, I wanted to provide a little bit of background for how we formed the committee. And, I was thinking about in our listening session, somebody brought up that if we're trying to build trust and we're trying to be transparent and accountable, that us ODOT, we really need to tell you what we're doing and what we're thinking and why we're doing something, because if we don't share that with you, then you don't know. So with that in mind, I kind of wanted to share what our thinking was when we convened the committee. So it's a 15-member committee, and it was a very collaborative process. We really worked with people in Oregon and in Washington. We worked with the city of Vancouver and the city of Portland and Clark County, Clackamas County, Multnomah County, Washington County, many county coordinating committees and CBOs, technical advising committees for those county coordinating committees, really asking people for their help, getting in touch with people who could help us really think about folks who are traditionally underserved in transportation projects. And we absolutely were thinking about people that are living with a disability. And our approach was to cast a wide net and to really look at that like broad representation. So we really put a heavy emphasis on transit and ride service providers in multiple geographic areas, thinking that through that professional experience and people's networks, that we would be able to get some of those perspectives and be able to make connections through your professional networks. So I just want to acknowledge that, as we're just starting this work, and we're going to learn so much as we continue to develop this committee, that, we're now realizing that we don't have that lived experience, and that's different. That's different from a professional experience or, sharing something secondhand. So that's what I hope we can talk about today, is how are we going to bring in that lived experience? And it's a wide range of experience, it's not just, it's a big question. It's a wide range of experience. So there's lots of options, and I hope we can have a good discussion to kind of see if we're hitting the mark on this. So we have a few ideas. Can I get the next slide, please? Okay. So here's some ideas that we have. We could have interviews. We could put out some surveys to try to build up our base to learn more, some baseline knowledge. Other ideas that we had were creating a panel with many different types of experience of disability and bringing that into the committee, so that we could be sharing that perspective and information with you and everyone that's watching and the project team. We also had some ideas about maybe doing some very focused discussion groups, and we need to have a more deeper discussion about the best way to put these together. But these are just this is just the beginning of some ideas that we had. So I'm going to stop there. What do you think?
I'm going to stop sharing so we can be in gallery together. Okay. There you go. James?
Hi. I like some of the ideas that you've come up with. I would love to find out from the greater community if there's other ideas, but I definitely like the idea of, bringing that voice in to the meeting, specifically when we talk about specific topics, because I think there's organizations to be able to take it from this very broad to a very specific conversation, because it's too broad to say, well, we had somebody show up and they gave a presentation and we can check that box. I think it needs to live in the work that we're doing as far as that voice is concerned.
Thank you so much, James. Izzy?
Yeah, I do like all the ideas listed. I do think it'd be good to have like a grounding in providing the space for panel discussion where folks come in and share those experiences, just to get the committee, you know, on the same page and a better understanding, and then possibly going forward from there, maybe like a more reoccurring thing, whether that be a subcommittee or opportunities for folks to plug in. But I do think that like providing that space for a grounding would be a good place to start and kind of building off that.
Thank you. Philip.
Yes, you know, having spoken with Hannah offline about some of these issues, you know, I like several of the suggestions that are on that slide as to, you know, how to engage, you know, members of the community. One of the things that I thought it might be worth exploring, and I'm going to sort of direct this question to Amanda, only because, you know, being in Washington County, I recall a couple of years ago with the Aloha, and I forget the name of that actual project or that study, but the study that looked at improvements and development in Aloha that was all based on specific community input. And I was impressed at how that engagement was actually conducted and how the information that was gathered, who actually did the facilitation, how that information was gleaned, and then how that information got put together into a report and then, you know, passed on to the appropriate decision makers. So not that that specific model would need to be repeated, but I think there was something in the method there that could be adopted here for the purpose of reaching out to, you know, the disability community and other communities as well that are not directly represented on this committee.
Yeah, so that Aloha tomorrow, and I can't remember, was that Tiger View grant, and that was out of land use and transportation, and at the time I was in public health, so I only know from my public health side, but what I do know, because I was fairly involved in helping the folks there talk about or figure out some of the community engagement piece, was really just that idea of hiring contracting with community-based organizations that are from the community. So at the time it was the Center for Intercultural Organizing, which then morphed into Unite. But they were, you know, the organization itself was BIPOC, and so then they were getting out into the community to folks to participate, and then hosting events, culturally specific events and other types of events in those locations where the you know, in Aloha, where things were happening, where some of those changes were proposed. So it was a pretty, I mean, it's a pretty big effort, and it wasn't just Center for Intercultural Organizing. I think there were other community-based organizations that were involved in that, as you know, that land use and transportation contracted with as well. I just know the stuff that CIO did because public health was connected to some of that stuff. I think that you know, that model of contracting with community-based organizations to actually reach community where they're at is a you know, fairly common way to do things. I think the challenge at this point, at least from my own personal perspective of community engagement at Washington County, is the online nature of things, and it's intrinsically, you know, the barriers that the immediate barriers related to online engagement that impact equity and the ability to be equitable. And so I think we're really struggling with how to do that. And we have some hybrid, meeting models that are slightly in person and slightly not, but the technology needs in order to be able to do that, it limits where you can do that. So, I mean, I think it's a challenging time right now to do that type of work, but certainly, in terms of the disability connection, I think the more that we can look to organizations that, are part of that community, the better, the more resonance we'll have. And I also think, I think our role as the folks on the advisory committee is to be a touch point, right? Like I assume that we're all brought to this table, or was suggested that we come to this table because we know how to connect to those communities, not necessarily that we have, the whole perspective of a particular community that we might represent or an area that we represent, but that we know how to connect those folks. And so I assume that we'll be looked to help with that in, whatever way that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Great question, Philip. Park.
Yes, I think the timing and what the topic we're talking about at the time may create a particular interest for people with disabilities. And I'm thinking that at least certain disabilities require people to use alternative transportation methods. So when we get to the point of discussing how we treat taxis or Uber or social service vans or volunteers, that will be a time that will be of particular interest to people with disabilities that have to use alternative types of transportation rather than driving their own car.
Thank you, Park. Yes, Sharon.
Would you mind putting up the suggestions again?
Sure, I'll be glad to. So enlist future presenters at your meetings, identify people with lived experience to participate in telephone and video interviews, interactive discussion groups, and focus survey instruments. Develop appropriate questions for future online surveys and comment forums. Create an equity and mobility subcommittee that would meet regularly to focus on issues related to people experiencing disability and outreach to specific organizations or individuals to provide input. Host a panel discussion at a future equity and mobility advisory committee meeting to dedicate time to grounding the committee on issues related to people experiencing disability and intersection with pool project.
I think what resonates with me, at least, are a couple. I think there's some great ideas here, but listing future presenters for committee meetings kind of on topics that are before us, I think would be helpful. So then we're hearing perspectives on the topic that we're grappling with. And again, I also like the host a panel discussion for grounding. I think, to me, that's something that I would personally appreciate. I think online surveys and those kinds of things it's really hard to get that grounding perspective, which is, I think, what I'm thinking I would like to see as part of this process, personally. I think there's great ideas here. Those were the two that resonated with me.
This is Diana. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just echoing what has already been said. I agree with what has been said. I often think about when when large systems engage with BIPOC communities and our most vulnerable communities, and we want them to be part of the conversation and bring them to the table, we sometimes forget to honor their time. And let's be very careful and cautious of not exploiting our most vulnerable communities through this process. And so we need to think about, so what does that look like in terms of a compensation, in terms of not only compensation, but also those accommodations as well. And so I just want us to be very, keeping that on the forefront as we're thinking about how we're going to engage our BIPOC and vulnerable communities in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. Anyone else?
Amanda's hand is up.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
I just have a question for development of this list, or in thinking through this. Have you talked to people with disabilities specifically? I mean, about how they want to be engaged, or what might be the best way to engage them?
I made some phone calls, but I left voicemails and haven't, just to be completely honest, that I tried. So no, I haven't spoken to anyone, but that would be the next step. Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Abe's hand is up, and then I think I saw Bill's hand up.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, I'm sharing, so I can't really see anything. Abe?
Yeah, I think this is a great list of recommendations to bring in that perspective. I'm particularly drawn to the subgroup one. And I guess I would also still lift up adding a member to the committee, even though I know there's probably logistic issues with that. But I think part of this group is a representation of sharing power, and by giving that community a seat at this table, I think that's so important. So
Thank you, Abe. And then who's next, Penny?
Bill.
Bill. Okay, yes. Hi, Bill.
Hey, so I agree with a lot of what has been said, and I don't want to echo what people have already said just for the sake of repeating it. One thing I'd like to say, though, is thank you to Hannah and ODOT for taking this request seriously and spending time to look into it and really dig into it. I think that means quite a lot. Even though I might not agree with all of it, I appreciate the time and the effort that has gone into it. I want to say thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
John's hand is up, Christine.
Okay, go right ahead.
Good evening. I would just offer for you all to reach out to our TriMet's CAT committee or Committee for Accessible Transportation. Some of the ODOT team members or project members presented last night during our Transit Equity Advisory Committee, and it was great. We had about 14 community-based organizations and members of our Committee for Accessible Transportation. They meet ongoing, and they're available, and we can give you some times just to engage them in their forum. But they have a lot of really good perspectives, and I think it's exactly the kind of conversations you're talking about. So I'll offer that up, and I'd love to make a connection after the fact.
Thank you, John. I'll make sure that connection gets made. So Hannah, I am going to kind of bring this back to you in terms of next steps.
Well, I'd like to connect with everyone and get get some contacts so that I could make some phone calls and, you know, vet these ideas with some folks in the disabled community. I have a few from Dr. Wu that I made phone calls to, but haven't been able to connect with. So I'd love to do that. And our next meeting is in December, and it is a full engagement workshop, and we're dedicating the full meeting to really digging into process equity and you know, refining our equitable engagement plan, looking at what we did, who we reached out to, how we reached out to them, and kind of looking at the measures, like was, you know, the impact that we had. So I think that could be a good space for digging into this and taking this a little bit further. That would be my suggestion.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Thank you, everyone, for engaging in this conversation. As you can tell, it will be a continuation, and we will get more specific as we move forward. And I really appreciate everyone engaging in this. Thank you so much. So I'm going to move us to our next slide, which is about committee report outs. So in my previous, I'm going to stop sharing. In my previous email to you guys, I asked for James and Amanda and Fabian to come forward, specifically those three people, to talk about what their constituents, what your communities are saying. Fabian can't be here today, so we'll get in the next time. But James and Amanda, I have teed you up, and this is your space, and then we'll be able to have a brief conversation around that. So James, if you would like to start us off, that would be great.
Sure. Again, I have to let everyone know this is my little screen and this is my big screen. Mm-hmm. And I put together some notes, so I'm going to be looking this way, so I'm sorry about that. It's like okay. Presentation 101 error. I guess when I went to school, there was no video conferencing. Only in the movies. All right, so first off, when it comes to my community, the reason I think why I'm sitting in this seat, it's because of my role in workforce. I'm the board chair at Work Systems, Inc., and I've been in that role for a number of years now, and I really feel that I've really learned and got a really deep understanding of the needs of people who are in need of employment services across the region. So at last meeting, you know, I had a lot of questions about the modeling and so forth that we were talking about. And a lot of it had to do with like the flow of workforce, and then kind of a deeper dive again into the effect on peoples with disabilities. And so I had a follow-up offline meeting with Josh, and we had a chance to dig into it a little bit deeper. And then even from that, I said, I'm one of those people who, you know, I'm not just here to ask questions, I want to find out answers for myself. And in this context, kind of bring it back to you guys. So these aren't answers, these are just kind of some findings. So I put together this document that I think is going to get, I'm not sure how you guys might be able to actually see
it with everyone. It'll go through that matrix. We'll put it into the matrix and share it with everyone there, James.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So of course, when you go back and you look for any information, everything seems so dated now. So when you say, you know, 2017, well, that doesn't even register with today, but it is the only information that we have. So, excuse me, that's what I had to move forward. So one of the things I looked for first, I got to pull up another document, is I found a modeling that gives a visual presentation of you know, all 4 counties in our region here, Multnomah, Washington, Clackamas, and Clark counties, and talking about the workforce populations, and if those populations are moving or staying in the county, and then where they're moving. And it's much more graphical with some data and so forth. And so just to keep things moving, talking specifically about Clackamas County, because that's where we're at today. This was done in 2013, and only 33% of the workforce in Clackamas County stays in Clackamas County. And so the overwhelming number of people are leaving the county. So that to me says people are in transit, people are moving, people are using the infrastructure. The majority of them are going to Multnomah County, and then number 2 would be out to Washington County, and then to Clackamas County. And so you can see that when you see this document, you'll see those flows of people in and out of the county. Now, there also are a number of people, most heavily, equally from Multnomah County and Washington County, coming into Clackamas County for work. There's a smaller smaller number of people coming from Clark County into the area. So one of the things that I think is really interesting when you talk about tolling is, are you just going to toll the local people, or are you looking to try and capture the movement through and in and out of the area? And so that's one of the things that I find interesting as far as the employment flow goes. In this document, I came across a lot of other facts and stuff I threw in, but one of the things that I wanted to also highlight is finding that people that most need inexpensive transportation options often are the least, have the least access to them. So people with low incomes and people of color depend more on means other than driving alone. Transit is especially important to ensure mobility for these communities, who are twice as likely to be frequent transit riders as higher income persons or white people. And that's just direct quote from the information I was able to find on that study. And so one of the things that we talked about was implementing these things, the effects that it's going to have on the surrounding communities. And one of the things is looking at the transit systems and how those are going to be affected if a tolling went into play. And so those transit systems, the effect could have a greater impact on low income and peoples of color. And then I have another graphic here that kind of shows non-white communities versus white communities and what type of modes of transportation they use. And I'm not going to go through, there's a lot of other information there that you can read through. And then another piece as it comes and it talks about peoples with disabilities. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but I was able to find some information where a study was done between 2014 and 2018 in the state of Oregon. And it was talking about that we have 15% of our population are people with a disability. And then it breaks down the different types of disabilities. But what I really think that this really shows is that we're talking about a rather large community, even though they might be less visible to most of us, me included, but it is a huge community. So when we're talking about these challenges, we're talking about 15% of the community. So, you know, as we start talking about the stuff we were talking about previously around different ways in which we can engage this community so that we're able to bring out really what their needs are and what is important to them, this really to me drives home the importance of that, because it is such a big represented community. And there was another piece that kind of tagged on the back of this is also talking about the older community and their needs for transportation and the impact that transportation has on their life. And then I got one final piece, and that's There was a study done by Kessler, and that study showed that 26% of the respondents said that their biggest barrier to employment was transportation. And so, you know, as we move forward with this work, I'm really happy to see that we're taking a deeper dive into the needs of communities that have disabilities. All right, now I gotta go into another.
Thank you, James. Thank you so much for that. And we'll look forward to being able to read all of the different studies that you've cited. Thank you for pulling that together.
Yep, no problem.
Bill, yes.
I wanted to bring this up during the public comment period, but there is a comment from Lori McGrath, I believe on page 2, which does a good job of sort of summing up this potential situation. And I think that is something that we should take the time to read the comment and be aware of how it could affect those populations. Because she is very concise in how tolling would impact her. And I think it's exactly what we're looking at.
Thank you, Bill. Amanda?
So I don't have as much to share as James. Maybe I'll do an interpretive dance or something. No, I think because this committee is still in early days, I think people didn't, as I was talking to different community groups that I work with, there's not a lot there yet to react to. So, I mean, I think there's some general feelings about tolling that are some general comments about tolling, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions. And so I feel like I don't have a good picture of things to share because there's not a lot to react to. I mean, I think folks are happy that there's some equity focus to all of this, but I think it still seems very conceptual.
Very good. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. We have a little bit of time. Any other comments from constituents? Eduardo?
Well, if someone else has something on constituents, because my question is more about what is expected from us during this portion of it. James shared some great information that he found, but I had understood it more as like what we were hearing from the community, which Amanda got at. I personally have not been going around asking people how they feel about tolling. So I would just like a better explanation on what we're doing here, just to provide some context to the public. I am a bi-state commuter. I make the trip from Clark County to Washington County for work using public transportation. So just again, some clarity on what is expected from us.
Yes, I think what Amanda brought forward is absolutely appropriate, and what James brought forward, right? It is resources as well as what you are hearing. And it is important that you are a conduit back and forth between the committee and your community. So this is giving you time to bring those perspectives forward. And I just want to make sure that people get a chance to speak. Sometimes there's a lot to talk about. Sometimes there's not a lot. That's why I'm giving 3 people each meeting an opportunity to be able to come forward. Thank you. Sharon, yes.
Thank you. I guess it's along the same lines. I'm not sure what community I'm supposed to bring feedback from. Do you want to hear from like what the OTC is thinking or what Central Oregon is thinking? Because my guess is that Central Oregon tolling is probably not on their radar much.
Mhm. Well, you are in a beautiful position to be able to bring all sorts of perspectives forward.
The pressure, I don't know.
No pressure at all. Nope. Bill, I think I saw your hand go up. Is that true?
Yeah, so I would like to clarify that we're looking for community perspectives in regards to tolling, but also how to implement it equitably, because I'm pretty sure I could talk to anyone in Southwest Washington and I know what their answer is going to be in regards to tolling. But how to implement tolling equity, I think, is a different conversation. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's the one that we're engaged in.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And we're going to have some more clarity around what your charge is. So I am going to go ahead and move us forward into committee work. So we'll be looking at the charter and also the recommendation process. So the committee charter revisions focused on the vision and mission, addressing past injustices, community benefits, and how to handle press inquiries. And so in my email to you, I highlighted what was changed, what was additional, and specifically, we are a committee representing Portland metro area and Southwest Washington, and spelling out the National Environmental Policy Act, using a trauma-informed perspective to craft policy recommendations to prevent harm, facilitate community benefits, and address past harms. And then also wanted to make sure that we included something around press inquiries. So members will notify designated ODOT team member, Hannah Williams, of all requests of the media. If members do speak with the media, they will clarify that they are speaking as an individual and not speak on behalf of the project or the committee, nor characterize the points of view of other members. So these were the changes that were suggested from our last meeting. And I would like to open this up for any other conversation. And then I would like to invite us to see if you're ready to adopt this. Penny, can you let me know if people are raising their hands? I'm going to leave this up here for a little bit.
Park is up.
Hi, Park.
Yeah, I've got a problem with the word prevent in the second bullet. And I would replace that with something like limit. This is going to be a balancing act. There's going to be winners and losers. It's impossible to have no harm done to any large group. I'm reminded of the transit systems where they're continually trying to improve service, and it's always you improve service to more people than you cause harm, but you do both. And I remember someone at one of the public meetings that said, if you improve my transit service anymore, I'm not going to be able to use it at all. And that's just everything is a balancing act, and it's going to be impossible to prevent.
Thoughts about that?
Dwight is up.
Dwight? Thank you.
I mean, what's in Word I think the word mitigate might be more appropriate. Just my opinion.
I'm seeing some head nods on that suggestion, Christine. Yeah, I'm seeing some thumbs up.
So mitigate harm. People are agreeing with that. Thumbs up. Can I see thumbs up with all of that, pretty please? Beautiful, beautiful. Abe, your thoughts? Okay, good. Amanda? Yeah, Diana? Great. Michael, yes, okay. So I suggest that I apologize, that you adopt this with mitigate harm in the charter. And I would like to see thumbs up that you're adopting your charter. Yes? Beautiful. Congratulations. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, yes, yay. So I am going.
On that, I've got one question I wanted to ask about the last bullet that was added to that charter.
Yes.
And it just says to the media. So if we're contacted by somebody outside of this group that might not be with the media, we don't need to then make Hannah aware. I mean, there's a lot of other opportunities for people to reach out to you that aren't quote unquote the media. And I'm not sure how we're supposed to handle those situations.
Well,
and Christina, can I add to that?
Mm-hmm.
Not only would we be, well, media is one thing, but some of us participate in other official venues that may have conversations that are related to this. And so I would imagine that maybe media should be expanded to include other kinds of public policy venues or other committees or whatever. But I think to that point, this might need to be slightly expanded.
Thoughts?
I mean, I specifically sit on Region 1 Act, and am I going to be free to make comments at Region 1 Act that refer to some of the conversations and sort of themes that are being conversed here at EMAC, that is also kind of that would also involve attention that I think it would be good for me to be clear about.
Thank you, Philip. Go ahead, Penny.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest if you could flip back to that slide.
Okay.
I was wondering what people would think about kind of an addendum there in that bullet. If members do speak with the media, or other people requesting information about EMAC, they will clarify that. So just broaden it right there. If members do speak with the media, or others, and we could use the right language there, they will clarify. So that I think broadens it. You still have the obligation to notify Hannah if it's a request from the media. If it's others, the point is you're not speaking for the committee or speaking on behalf of the project. You're providing your point of view. I like Sharon. She has her thumb up on that. Thanks, Sharon.
Yeah, thank you.
And Park is up.
Okay, Park.
Yeah, I agree with the comments, but I think we're getting into wordsmithing now. So I would suggest that someone work on language and bring it back next month and let us see it before the meeting. It almost needs another paragraph dealing with non-media, because you do want Hannah notified if it's media, but if it's neighbor down the street, that's not involved.
I guess if I can jump in, Christine, I guess I know we'd love to get this finalized so we don't have to keep bringing it up every meeting. So how about maybe an amendment to that part that we write some language and send it out, and would the committee feel okay about giving thumbs up via email once we provide that language so the charter can be finalized?
Does that work for everyone?
Mhm.
Thumbs up? Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. So I am going to tee up Penny here to talk us through and to remind us about the committee's charge. So Penny, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Christine. And I just lost what I was going to be looking at. Wow, boy, man, amazing how when you manipulate things, they just go away. So essentially on this slide, the one thing that we really wanted to spend some time on and provide some clarity on was, as a committee, who are you making recommendations to? Because that's your job as an advisory committee, is you're making recommendations about specific things, and those are elucidated in your charter. They're listed in your charter. So we put this slide together to kind of clarify where you're providing input and who you're providing input to. And so as you can see, it's fairly straightforward. The first two items are about giving recommendations to the project team to help inform their work. And in your charter, it says that under your purpose, it says that you will provide input and support ODOT during the technical and environmental review process. And that is ensuring things like milestone decisions and project developments are grounded in the equity framework and so forth and so on. Also that you will provide input on mobility and equity strategies as the toll projects are going through the environmental review process. So that kind of makes sense that your recommendations there, because that work is ongoing through the project team, that you would be providing any recommendations to the project team. The Oregon Transportation Commission is not giving guidance at that level of detail to ODOT. So that's why those two items are for your input goes to the project team. When we get to the recommendations for what mobility and equity strategies should be included, then that becomes a bigger issue. And that is where, yes, you'll be giving advice to the project team as they work to develop and do the environmental review. But even beyond that, as decisions are going up to the commission, you will be providing advice to the commission as well about equity and mobility strategies, because that is part of the bigger decision to be made. So I hope that's clear. There's one other part that, and I think Heather's going to talk just a little bit about the alignment of your work with the technical work in a bit, so that might help clarify that. There's one other thing that's not on this slide, but I just wanted to provide a reminder, because somebody asked me the question and we thought, well, perhaps if one person has the question, more people have the question. So this is just a reminder about your decision process as a committee. In your charter, it is defined as seeking consensus. So in other words, you are not a voting body, rather your collective perspectives are really, really important. There is strength in consensus. So if consensus is reached, and that is always the goal, it's much stronger than individual voices. However, if there are important issues that you have different perspectives on and consensus isn't possible, that is also important information for both the project team and the Oregon Transportation Commission. So I just wanted to reiterate that in case you were wondering, or people are asking, do you get to vote? And that's not the purpose of this. That's not what this committee is chartered to do. So before I turn it over to Heather, let me stop there and see if there's any questions about this and if this clarification helps a little bit in terms of who you're actually providing your advice and recommendations to.
Any questions?
Well, it was either as clear as mud and I bamboozled him into silence, or it was brilliantly clear. I see. Phil, is your hand up? No. Okay. All right. Well, with that then, Christine, if it's all right, I think I will send it right along to Heather.
Absolutely. Heather Wills. You're
Thanks. Thanks, Penny and Christine.
up.
First, I have to say it warmed my heart to have a conversation about Aloha, Oregon, which is my hometown where I grew up, because I don't usually hear Aloha talked about very often. So I was like, oh, that's my hometown where I grew up. So this is basically a timeline taking everything Penny went over and putting it into a sequence that aligns with the environmental review process for the I-205 toll project. So there's really two main pieces of the environmental review, and this really focuses on the technical review piece, but there also is the engagement. The engagement will go through along through this entire time frame. So it's really just like a long continuous bar that would go below all of this. Although there are some really focused places as well, like right now where we have a comment period, a formal comment period asking for comments on very specific questions, in this case around the purpose and need and alternatives. So we're going to introduce today performance measures and evaluation criteria, and that is going to be that first piece, leading into our technical analysis. So for the environmental review process, we're going to begin our technical analysis following the comment period after we hear what the community says about the performance measures that we've put out there for everyone, as well as the alternatives. And so the committee's input will be really focused on the equity performance measures. So we'll need to finalize those pretty early in the process before we use those performance measures to conduct the analysis. So the hash line in the middle is really that iterative work with the committee. So we'll bring back, as we use the performance measures that we've discussed with this committee and we start implementing them in the analysis, we'll come back and share what we're finding through that analysis. And that's leading to a preferred alternative that then leads to a environmental assessment that shares all of those findings. So that analysis with the performance measures that you've adopted for us to use will then be put into those performance measures will be used in the analysis. And then as we share information with you, we'll start talking about the equity and mobility strategies that make the toll projects better. So we'll share what we're finding under different disciplines in the analysis. So like air quality, communities, noise and vibration, and there's a whole entire chapter on transportation, which is where the multimodal information would be included. And so there's a lot of we will have a lot of discussion with the committee back and forth around how those equity and mobility strategies might be implemented as part of the toll project. And then ultimately, before the toll project decision has been made, which is about 2 years from now, we will the committee will make a recommendation of equity and mobility strategies to the Oregon Transportation Commission. So that's that differentiation between the work we're doing as a committee with the project team and that back and forth as we go through the analysis to that final Oregon Transportation Commission recommendation. So this is kind of high level, and there's going to be a lot of information and a lot of back and forth in this process. But I hope this helps give an idea of sort of the timing of the elements that Penny was talking about. That's it.
Questions? Heather and Penny, you guys are so clear.
No, Bill has a question.
Oh, okay.
So the I-5 toll project environmental review, is this going to be repeated for the I-5 section?
There'll be overlap. Yes, there will be some overlap. So some of the meetings that the timing will be a little bit different, obviously, because we're starting the environmental review process now for I-205. And so once we start the I-5 project, there'll be meetings where we'll discuss elements of I-205, where we're at in that process, and then elements of I-5. So it might be a split meeting with different discussions. But yes, ultimately.
Where will these meetings be taking place? Is this all Oregon centric, or will you have representation in Southwest Washington as well?
Which meetings?
Whatever meetings you were just referring to.
Oh, I'm talking about our EMAC meetings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The EMAC meetings.
So sometime you might be tackling I-205 and sometimes you might be tackling I-5.
Correct.
Yep.
But certainly the engagement for I-5 will look a little bit different than the engagement for I-205. So those conversations will be more centered around those specific projects, and the communities that we're engaging with are going to be different for each. There will be overlap though.
Yeah, and the beautiful part is that the committee now is informing what can happen in that engagement for I-5.
Correct. Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay. Heather, thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Really appreciate this. It really helps to put it into perspective. And Penny, thank you again also for giving us that high level, our purpose, the reason why we're here, and then how the input gets used. That is going to take us to a 5-minute break.
Before you go, Christine, sorry to interrupt, but I noticed that we do have an observer who has raised their hand digitally, and I would ask that you remind folks that we've already passed the public comment period.
And I'm sorry that we aren't able to answer your question or engage in your question at this point. I didn't see that. Sorry about that.
But people can submit comments and use the go online and use the website and so forth, or email comments, and they will be shared with the EMAC.
That'll be great. Thank you for that, Penny. Appreciate that. All right. I would like to give us a 5-minute break and to come back at 10 after, pretty please. Thank you so much.
For some reason today, whenever I hit unmute, I almost hit leave meeting. So if I accidentally leave the meeting, that's I'm just trying to say something.
Exit yourself right out of there. Done that so many times. Welcome back. Hi, Chris.
Hey, how's it going, Christine?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, good. Thank you. Joining from the Philippines.
Nice.
Just kidding. I wish.
Okay, well, we're going to move on. I'm going to and jump into the next part here, which is working on the draft 205 I-5 Toll Projects Equity Framework. And we have Chris Leppy back with us again. Thank you so much for being here, Chris.
Thank you. Glad to be with you guys again.
So I'm going to advance the slide for you. You just call and tell me when, and we'll just go forward.
Sounds good. So hey everybody, this is Chris Leppe once again. I'm here to talk equity with you today as it relates to this project. I'm one of the equity specialists on the project team, and here to circle back with you to share modifications to the Toll Projects Equity Framework since our last meeting, since our last EMAC meeting. But before we get to the changes, just for the benefit of those in the virtual audience that might not have participated in the last meeting, I wanted to give a little bit of context as to what an equity framework is, why we developed it, and so the who, what, where, why, when kind of question, right? So in terms of the why, well, really it comes down to previous community input that ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation project team received, including concerns about equity and impacts to lower income populations, and as well as concerns about cut-through traffic and the need for greater transportation options. So this led ODOT to prioritize equity in relation to the project and to seek to develop an approach to getting there. And so this framework is really a roadmap that helps to kind of get everybody on board on how we achieve the equitable outcomes that we're trying to seek here. A framework is a set of ideas, rules, or beliefs from which something is developed or on which decisions are based. It really helps to ensure that plans are developed and reviewed and amended and applied in a consistent and transparent way. It's kind of a way to kind of provide clarity and transparency. So who produced the draft equity framework? Well, that was the equity team that consists of consultants Alan Hoffman, Amber Ontiveros, Leslie Parker, Desiree Williams-Raji, and myself, with additional input from ODOT, WSP, and other project consultants. The framework was adapted from Transforms Pricing Roads Advancing Equity Report, an organization that I used to be with, work for. The framework is basically being adapted or has been adapted to the toll projects to help ensure equitable process and as well as equitable outcomes. So the I-205 Toll Projects Equity Framework includes the following: includes goals for the proposed toll projects, an explanation of why the Oregon toll program is prioritizing equity, a definition of equity within the context of the toll projects, as well as some key concepts and definitions related to equity, the overall approach and organizing principles for addressing equity, and finally, a set of actions for measuring benefits and burdens to historically underrepresented and underserved communities and populations. At our last EMAC meeting, we presented the framework for the first time and received valuable feedback, in particular from Abe Moland and Diana Avalos-Leos, which we incorporated into the document since that time. And I'll go over those modifications with you today, after which Christine will request approval for the framework for us moving forward. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Christine.
Mm-hmm.
So the major changes, the major modifications or revisions that took place since our last meeting, we changed the demographic bullets on the first page to be more inclusive, specifically including language with reference to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC individuals. We also, this was some of the more substantial changes. We incorporated more of a public health element and incorporated that throughout the document, including integrated a trauma-informed perspective, which we'll share a little bit more in a couple minutes here. We added definitions for BIPOC, economic disadvantage, trauma, and trauma-informed perspective, and finally added additional authors and contributors. If you go to the next slide. So here are just a few key themes about the trauma-informed perspective and how we incorporated that into the framework. We defined trauma and a trauma-informed perspective. We recognize that historic and ongoing trauma related to the killings of Black people by police and historic inequities and displacement. We included language about thoughtful engagement of communities who have experienced past trauma and harm. And we acknowledge the opportunity to shift power to impacted community members. So as an example, if we go to the next slide, and I'll just sort of leave this up here for a little bit for you to read through. But the additional language that you can see there highlighted in a different color, it states collectively, these transportation and land use investments have resulted in a form of trauma for these historically underrepresented and underserved communities. So just one example of how we incorporated that language into the document and that approach. If we go to the next slide, these are two definitions that we infused in a document, trauma and trauma-informed perspective. So I'll leave that up for a minute or two and let you read through them. And I also wanted to give the opportunity to Abe and Diana, if you wanted to chime in here in terms of why you felt or why you feel it's important to incorporate a trauma-informed perspective into the work that we're doing moving forward, or anything else that you'd like to share as far as context about that trauma-informed perspective.
I guess the one thing I would add is that, to me, how I interpret trauma is it occurs from an imbalance of power. And the more that we're able to articulate that and think about a framework to apply to our work, we're constantly thinking about power dynamics and how that plays out across transportation projects.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's what Abe said, and then adding to that, thank you, Abe, for that, is that too often at times in this work with large systems, we forget our past and the harms that have been caused in communities. And so recognizing that we could do better in how we are approaching this work was critically important to address in the definitions of a trauma-informed perspective. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing. If we go on to the next slide, and then we'll open it up for conversation. I just wanted to share a couple more definitions here. BIPOC individuals or populations, and also economic disadvantage. So these were two additional definitions that we incorporated into the framework. So with that, I want to thank you for your input from the last, or at the last EMAC meeting. I hope the changes that were made in response to the feedback are to your satisfaction. And I'll hand it over to Christine to discuss next steps. And also if you have any questions for me or the project team.
Great, I'm gonna stop sharing and we'll go ahead and have a conversation about this. Are there your thoughts about this? Any questions about this? Any questions about the suggested changes? Philip?
Yeah, I really like the definitions. I think those are excellent. I wonder if maybe after those definitions are actually presented in the document, if there is the opportunity to provide a few examples. So if you can go back to that, to those definitions. and especially to the next slide. So for example, in the trauma-informed perspective, I'm just wondering if it's possible to provide just some general clues or cues. So for example, when we say, recognize the signs and symptoms of people experiencing trauma, if it could be highlighted, like what are just a couple of examples of what those might be? Because I think in a purely intellectual definition, it may be hard to identify, well, exactly what is it that we're looking for? And I think to provide some examples of what we are looking for, provide some life to the definition.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Not that these have to be, exhaustive, kinds of things, but just something that sort of cues the mind.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts from folks on the project team about that? I think it's a good idea because it's a new concept for many people, right? And so incorporating perhaps some examples or additional context, like you said, I think might be beneficial.
I agree. I think it gives I think when people read this, they won't understand what it means, right? Without an example or two.
Or even if they understand it intellectually, translating that into something that's workable
tangible.
And tangible is something else.
Yeah, and if you could do that towards transportation specifically,
right.
You're not going to find much on toll projects, and mostly not the way we're trying to do this. So that, but maybe transportation, just the general field.
I agree, because I think if we go back to what we were saying about trying to simplify the language, I think by doing some of these examples or whatever you want to describe them as, can also put it into a context that kind of draws the picture for people, so to speak.
I like that.
Great feedback.
Maybe having like a breakout box of sorts. With here's an example of how trauma manifested in a particular community, and this is what was done by X agency in order to address that prior trauma through this particular perspective or approach.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
I also like that because then it also recognizes the history. It's like, oh, we can talk about it and now we've articulated it, but let's also recognize that these happened in these examples.
Perfect. Other thoughts? This is great. This is good, really good input.
Can we look at the economic disadvantaged again? I'm wondering why this is limited to impaired due to diminished capital and credit opportunities. There seems to be a lot of other things like education and neighborhood
That's a good point.
and whatever.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, location, right? Relative to jobs and so on and so forth. I think that is a good point, is kind of rounding out this this description, this definition a little bit more, particularly from not just kind of the capital and credit side, but as you mentioned, education and other factors. I think that would make the definition stronger.
Examples could also be very helpful. As you make the definition broader, and then you have examples that really drive home some of these key pieces.
Mhm.
I think you could just drop the language between due and opportunities. So it would just say has been impaired as compared to others in the same and similar line of business.
Let me see here. So, so compete in the free enterprise system has been impaired due to, can you repeat that again?
Impaired as compared to others.
Okay. And then you might have something like, for example, I think someone mentioned the provision of examples. So then then at that point, it's not like you're limiting the definition. It's just you're providing a couple of examples of how this is manifested, right?
Yes, that makes sense.
That'd be good. Christina, does that make sense to you? Others on the project team?
It does. It does. And I think, you know, a small group of the committee and the project team coming together to create those examples would be really helpful. Does that feel right, Chris?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so far, I feel like the modifications have been, you know, pretty straightforward. I think we could take it, make those changes, incorporate it. So I guess the question, Christine, would be in terms of procedurally, you know, we're seeking adoption today, right? This is going to be a working document, so you know, changes can take place over the life of the project. But assuming these changes are made, is that the sort of idea? Assuming these changes are made, is the committee willing to approve the framework for use moving forward? Is that right, Christine?
Exactly.
I have a question here, because it's like we go through these documents, and I think, you know, it's great to go through these and give this input, but like the document hasn't been modified or changed in the way that we've discussed. So it's difficult to vote on, yeah, let's move this forward. I know we want to move the needle forward, but I think that's where we get back to what we talked about earlier, where it's like, we've gone through this during the meeting. Now this is going to need to go out in an email, and people are going to need to be able to vote on the new revised and use that at the next meeting and saying, okay, this was approved, we're moving forward. But it's difficult for me to say that I support this until the work has been done to the document.
Even though it's a living document, James? James?
You cut out a little bit, Christine. Could you restate?
Okay. Even though it's a living document?
I understand that it's a living document and I want this document to live on, but I just think that it's, you know, it's half baked right now. And you just said, hey, let's get some people together that might want to look a little bit more deeply into some of those examples. That's what's going to bring the document to life, I believe, because I think that Philip's input on that is great. And that's what really rounds out the document. And it's hard to bring this document to life without that other piece to it.
Very good. So we continue. we will bring a small group together with Chris. And you're absolutely right, James. It does bring it to life. And so I appreciate that perspective. And so our next slide, which is the committee ready to adopt? Not yet, but you're in the process of it. And I want to say that this is an excellent process back and forth between the committee and the project team. Like, this represents the really juicy, meaty stuff. And I'm just really grateful for the committee's input and how we're going to move forward. So now I'm going to kick it back over to Chris to define equity outcomes and evaluation criteria and performance measures. And he and Heather are both going to help us be able to understand what they mean.
So I'm going to start. Yeah, I'm going to start just to go through a quick orientation in terminology. And it's, as I'm thinking about this presentation, it's sort of like sunk in the plain language, and you'll see on the next slides that there's a lot of not plain language. So it'll be interesting to think how we might change some of this jargon that we use in the environmental review process, because it can be very jargony. So I'll go through the orientation and just reorient us to this step 2, and then turn it over to Chris to get into a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. So I think you'll recognize the flowchart. It is in the equity framework. It was based off of Transform's pricing policy equity framework. So it was really a framework developed for making decisions about pricing policy. So it didn't completely translate right away to a project. So we brought the equity team together that Chris talked about to really create this around a project. So the framework is really high level, and it's developed really for all phases of the toll project, including the National Environmental Policy Act or environmental review process. So had this been adopted during the first phase, the feasibility analysis, it could have been used there. It can be used during this phase, which is the environmental review process. It can be used in project development as we move the selected project forward. And you could even apply a lot of it to toll rate setting when the OTC goes through that process if they so desired. So there's a little slightly different language for the different phases of the project. And so it doesn't completely align with language in the equity framework. So I just wanted to ground us a little bit in that terminology. And just as a side note, the work that we're doing here, applying the framework, will be captured in its separate equity. It's a equity technical report. So it's really clear if you pick up the environmental document that sort of has its recipe of how it gets developed, that this is the work that the committee guided, and this is the work that ODOT really did to show that they really were serious about putting equity in the forefront of this process. Next slide, please. And so this is the jargony part. When we're in the environmental review process, in our process, we're talking about goals and objectives. Sometimes in processes, these can be vision and values, or lots of different terminology. We're using goals and objectives. So if you relate that to the equity framework, those are really the equity outcomes. This committee will be really focused on the equity outcomes, or the equity goals and objectives for the environmental review process. From there, we have evaluation criteria. So how are we actually going to meet the goals and objectives? And to the related to the conversation we had earlier, Chris is actually going to go through some examples and apply this so you have a better understanding of what we're talking about when we say evaluation criteria. So that is, how are we going to meet the goals and objectives? Moving on to the performance measures, which are really the quantitative and qualitative ways to measure. So there are some things that could be evaluated through the model output, and you can use the model output to quantitatively say, this is how a community is impacted by air quality, for instance. That is a model-driven way performance measure. And then there's more qualitative. So when you start talking about things like community cohesion and neighborhood, some of the things that can't necessarily be part of a model output, that is going to be more qualitative. And so there's 2 types of performance measures, and we use both in the project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris, and there might be questions, but I think Chris's piece will really provide a lot of more insight into the terminology.
Great, thank you. So thank you, Heather. So let's see, we're on, okay, perfect, we're on the right slide. So the question is, how do we measure equity as it relates to this project, right? The framework lays out two key themes. There's process and there's outcome equity. And I'll just read those for you here. Process equity is really about actively and successfully encouraging the meaningful participation of individuals and groups from historically underrepresented and underserved community. We're talking about the process, we're talking about the engagement, the participation. On the outcome equity side, what we're trying to get to are the actual benefits on the ground to communities in terms of affordability, access to opportunity, and community health. So just to make sure you guys know the next steps of where we're going with this is on the process equity side, we're going to spend most of our December meeting discussing process equity using the specific example of the I-205 toll project public engagement period. That engagement period ends in 2 days on October 16th. So the next meeting we'll be able to talk about what went well, what could have gone better, and use this as an entry into a couple of different concepts, right? Developing measures to evaluate whether our future engagement is successful, getting your ideas and input on ways to better reach communities that we don't traditionally hear from, that might be hard to reach. And then finally, developing the equitable engagement plan that is one of the 3 key pieces of this committee's work. So for outcome equity, we'll be working on outcome equity in the early months of 2021. So that'll come later. But as for today, I wanted to discuss a few examples, just a couple examples of process equity and outcome equity. So if we go to the next slide, here you can see an example of process equity with the goal being significant participation by members of historically underrepresented communities in public discussions about toll project planning and implementation. So this is one of the draft goals as part of the I-205 project. And so again, this is just an example. We wanted to use this as a prime kind of a way to get the conversation flowing, get you thinking for the next meeting about what kind of process equity and then also what kind of outcome equity goals and criteria and performance measures we should be thinking about. So if the goal is meaningful participation, then how are we getting there? How are we making sure that it's equitable, that we're having equitable participation? So perhaps we might ask, as an example of evaluation criteria, is the percentage of survey respondents responses in a non-English language similar to the percentage of limited English proficient speakers of that language in our region? So in other words, are the survey responses that we're getting reflected linguistically of the corridor or the area that this project is going through? In terms of the data, the performance measures, we could look at the total number of survey responses, compare that to the number of survey responses received in non-English languages, and then look at the percentage of limited English proficient speakers in the project area. So I'm going to open it up for some conversation here. I wanted to see what your thoughts are about the evaluation criteria as an example here, and the extent to which it could produce equitable outcomes or might not produce equitable outcomes. Might there be another way of measuring what we want as it relates to, for example, the linguistic component? So any thoughts as using this as an example here? Does it seem pretty clear cut? Straightforward?
Sharon has her hand up.
Sharon?
So the survey, can you explain to us how the survey is conducted? Because sometimes it seems that if we just like do an online survey, it only goes to people who are kind of in the know about transportation or have, you know, some interest in it, and trying to get really meaningful input from people who are busy, you know, have challenges with the language, you know, are in poverty and disability. Is there a way to expand the pool using a survey? And, you know, I think we're kind of challenged right now with COVID. We can't do kind of in-person, you know, community gathering input, that kind of thing. So how can we make sure we're getting the survey out?
That's a really good point, Sharon, and it's so commonplace in this field. You know, in terms of the online surveys and the responses that we get that are not it's just across the board has been my experience, not demographically representative of the populations in the area. So so you're right. We need additional tactics and strategies in order to get the right population mix. So with that, I'll open it up to the project team to share what we have done and potential strategies moving forward. If anybody wants to chime in, no pressure.
Sure. I can chime in.
Cool.
Yeah, that's a big question for engagement. You can have the greatest survey out there, but if you can't get it in front of people in a way that's accessible so they can participate with it, it's not very helpful. So there's a few things that we tried during this public comment, this 75-day public comment period. We used social media posts, we did advertisement, and that was pretty helpful for our Spanish online open house. We also did some ads on Spanish radio. We put advertisements in different community papers in language, linking to the survey in the language. And then we shared the Spanish survey with our partners, our community-based organizations that provide a lot of services to Spanish-speaking communities or Latinx communities. We worked with community engagement liaisons and in Spanish, Russian, Vietnamese, and Chinese to reach out into their communities with the surveys in the specific language, and also to use a translated fact sheet that was in the same language to kind of use it as a supplemental piece of information to help fill out the survey. And we'll have to hear more from the community engagement liaisons. They use different tactics, whether it's calling people or sending an email or using instant messenger or maybe doing something over Skype. There's different tools, or meeting people in person. We distributed some flyers that were printed in different languages we've distributed them to the Borland Free Clinic on Borland Road. We got some advice when we did a community presentation that was a good place to go to reach different members in the community that might not be, getting our emails or our newsletter. And then we also distributed flyers in Spanish and English that had the link to the survey doing this off of memory, the Tualatin food pantry. And that went into food boxes. And I think it was around like maybe 250. So that's a little snapshot.
Yeah, thank you for that, Hannah. I really appreciate it, because in our next meeting in December, we're jumping really deep into that. So thank you, Sharon, for that question. John, and then Philip.
So I think mine might be a little bit of redundant than if next month we're going into it, but I guess my question was really around the scale of the effort to try to quantify how big the soft goal is of how many folks you're trying to touch, and maybe within that, how would we define significant? Is like double their representation in the regional census or something like that. And then I think Hannah said a little bit about this. What are the languages you all are targeting? And part of this, and I think we may have heard this already, but I'm just struggling to keep up. Is there a parallel has there been a parallel Title VI analysis done of all this, or is that happening at the same time?
Heather, are you the person to answer that question?
We have not done a Title VI analysis, and yes, we will do it during the environmental review process.
Thank
But
you.
I don't know the details off the top.
Thank you, John.
John, you also raised a good point in terms of you said the scale of the effort and how many people we're trying to reach. You can figure out whether the amount of surveys that you're trying to obtain is statistically significant. But that's different too from the question of what is the adequate amount of outreach or the ideal amount of outreach or surveys as it relates to the project, right? But you can certainly you can use a little bit of statistics there. The other thing that you can do, and it's related to, I think the comment that Sharon made, is if you do have a little bit of a deviation in terms of the demographics of a survey, you can kind of weight the surveys towards to have more representation, right? So that's sort of another kind of thing to consider.
No, that makes sense. And I mean, we just finished a lot of community outreach, and it was a lot of work, and we totally relied heavily on community-based organizations. So I'm glad to know that's part of your process too. But I mean, over 10,000, over 12,000 folks we got engaged, but we had to do multiple. We could not only rely on online, obviously. So I'm excited to see what you guys find.
Mm-hmm. And just to kind of circle back to the evaluation criteria and performance measures, the important thing is having that evaluation criteria that we can get on board with and the appropriate performance measures, so that then the engagement and the outreach tracks that, right? So that over the course of the process, you can circle back, hey, are we getting that LEP? Are we hitting that LEP mark? And are we collecting data on the way? And can we share that back to this committee and to the community to show that we're doing the right kind of outreach? So that's really the importance of having clear evaluation criteria and performance measures. Unless there's any other questions or comments,
yes,
we can take it to the next example.
Philip Wu, and then you can go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Philip. You're on mute, Philip. Yeah. Uh-oh. Darn, did he go?
Okay, am I back? I'm back. I just had a question about just the phrasing of that evaluation criteria. And I mean, to me, it sort of sounds like, all right, so we have a denominator, which I guess in this case is the number of, or percentage of limited English proficient speakers in the region. So we have that number, I presume.
Yeah, it depends on the scale, but if you're talking about region or you're talking about project area,
well, I don't know. I'm just looking at what's written there.
Yeah.
Okay. So
there's census data. Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just have a problem with that phrase, which is the percentage of survey responses in a non-English language similar to?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the criteria should be what's the percentage of our responses compared to the denominator, not similar to. I think that's kind of an odd word, and maybe that's just a geekiness in me, but small matter.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I guess I would pose a question of, in terms of the evaluation criteria, do we want to phrase it in a question so that we can answer it, right, as a yes, no, or maybe, or ideally it's not maybe, it's a yes or no, right? So that would be one consideration. But I hear your point in terms of the similar question. Is similar a slippery word? I don't know. That's up to you guys to chime in on.
I mean, it's a slippery word to me when it comes to sort of, I mean, I think of criteria as being fairly quantitative. You know, and well, though maybe that's a performance measure. I don't know, but you know, similar is not a word that comes into my mind anywhere in this kind of in a process kind of consideration.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Thank
well,
you.
it's something to consider moving forward in terms of the language that we choose, the words that we choose, because words matter. So good point on there. Thank you. So with that was awesome. Thank you. Let's move on to the outcome equity example that we have here for you. So for outcome equity, if one of the goals is to support multimodal transportation choices, how would we measure whether we're doing so in an equitable manner? So we provided 2 examples of evaluation criteria here for you to think about. So the first, I'll read it for you. Is there an anticipated travel mode shift from single occupancy vehicles to high occupancy vehicles, transit, and other modes of transportation? So that's question 1. Is there, question 2 is there increased availability and access to transit service in underserved and underrepresented areas of the I-205 corridor? For performance measures, you can have percentage of trips using each travel mode and future transit enhancements incorporated into the toll project or funded as part of the toll projects. So with that, what are your thoughts about the evaluation criteria and performance measures? Are there any concerns as it relates to equity? How might you change them to optimize for equity? Any thoughts there?
James,
I think that, I mean, I like where you're going with this, obviously, but if you look at that number 2, that is so broad in the I-205 corridor. It's like you could say, well, yes, way up, totally out of this area along that corridor, we're going to take credit for that. And so I think that your evaluation criteria needs to be more specific to the affected area that we're talking about.
And it sounds like also you mentioned credit. I almost read there, sort of taking credit where credit is due and not counting, for example, oh, the city of Portland came through and invested a bunch of money into this community and therefore, yay, we met our mark, right? So that's good. That's really good input.
Well, and this is a high level, right? And you're giving us a feel for how we're going to get into this work even deeper. Yeah. Park, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have the same problem with number 2 and the second dot, in that they're indicating availability or projects, and I don't know whether you count 2 projects or whether you count the budget for the projects, but in neither case are anyone necessarily using them. So I like the number 1 and the first dot better than the alternatives.
This is great feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, and not to suggest anything here, but just as an example, one thing that the way that you might restructure some of these questions here as it relates to the second one is there something, for example, is there increased availability and access to transit service as a result of the funding from this project, from toll revenue in underserved and underrepresented areas of the I-205 corridor, just as one example, right?
And Chris, can I jump in and just say, and maybe to even be more aggressive about it, maybe we could say, how much will the I-205 corridor toll project support increased availability and access to transit service?
Yes, yeah, you could have a question of
I mean,
like
so really trying to make that connection direct. How much does this project actually support increased availability and access?
Yep.
not is there increased availability, because that gets to the point that someone, maybe James made, that, well, there might be availability somewhere else that has nothing to do with the project, but it's there.
Yeah, yeah, I feel you on that. And I mean, part of the question in my mind is, when we're looking at the benefits of this project, are underserved and underrepresented areas really being focused in on in terms of these investments? Or are you having like 10% going into underrepresented communities and like 90% going into, basically the non-equivalent of that? So, the question of going beyond just sort of like, hey, did we sprinkle a little bit of money up in there, or did we really make a substantial investment, and how do we make sure that we're measuring it correctly? I wanted to just bring up the example of mode shift here, and sort of ask any questions ask a question as it relates to that for y'all. I mean, as it relates to equity, is
Chris?
mode shift by itself? Yeah,
Chris?
Can you hear me?
Chris?
Are we running out of time?
Yes.
Oh, all right. Having too much fun here.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks for reeling me in, Christine.
Chris, I think mode shift is just too broad, because there's too many other factors that are beyond this to really measure mode shift change.
Right on. Well, hey, thank you all. This has been a great discussion. Good food for thought. Moving forward for the next meetings. Hopefully, this gave you a good sense about what's on the menu coming forward here. And so, Christine, I don't know if we have time to just sort of check in real quick with folks about whether they understand the concept of evaluation and performance measures, evaluation criteria and performance measures. Is everybody pretty much on board? We got 2 minutes. Yes, great.
Yeah.
Is that 2 minutes? Or are you saying peace?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. All right. So yeah. So any questions as it relates to this? Is it clear to you what we're talking about here? Is it still a little fuzzy for you?
I see
some thumbs up.
Yep.
And as it relates to the second question here, do you have any thoughts? I think you've already shared some really good, really important considerations. And yeah, I encourage you to think about that as we go into these next phases of the project and this conversation around the goals and objectives, evaluation criteria, and performance measures. So Christine,
I'm hearing.
I've got nothing else on my end unless there's any other kind of questions or input at this point. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chris. And we really appreciate your expertise in this. And I love your passion and how it comes through.
Thank you.
Have more of these wonderful conversations.
I love the passion in the room as well. Thanks, everybody.
And I appreciate the specificity that people are requesting, right? That is what came through for me, is that language and the specificity around the criteria, the performance measures are really important. So thank you, everyone. So to wrap up our wonderful meeting, our next steps, our December meeting will be a stakeholder and public engagement workshop. So it'll be a different format. You will be in breakout rooms and where we'll discuss and refine the equitable engagement plan in smaller breakout groups. We'll also work through process equity to define our initial evaluation criteria and performance measures. And we'll also determine and select the 2021 meeting dates, as well as approve the charter and the in all of that, I deeply appreciate your feedback. I deeply appreciate the process that we're going through together. And I just want to say thank you so much. Continue to reach out, continue to make suggestions, and I'll see you next month. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks. Thank you.
just because.